So, do you want to see the welcome to Inside the Museum bit, or do I?
Okay, well, here we go. Welcome to Inside the Museum with Tonia and Anna from Tudor House Museum. Joining us, we have Frankie and Tim, and also we'll be speaking to Jim later. I feel like a television presenter.
Oh, it's fantastic, isn't it?
Give this Alex on the One Show a run for her money.
This is our new podcast at Tudor House Museum, and what we want to do is just sort of take you behind the scenes a little bit with all the exciting things we are getting up to at the moment. But this being our first podcast, we thought it would be a really good idea to actually get the person whose idea this whole endeavour was into the room. So, Frankie, could you introduce yourself? There is only one of you. Could you introduce yourself for us, please?
Yes, hello. My name's Frankie. I'm a recent graduate of Museums and Cultural Heritage. I was looking for somewhere to channel all of my energy, and that's where Anna was stuck with me. So I'm now volunteering for Anna at Tudor House. I think I'm the engagement volunteer. I'm not sure of my true identity.
That sounds good. And also, what is really exciting is that Frankie is our first remote volunteer at Tudor House. I think we don't have any other remote volunteers, do we?
Not intentionally remote, no.
Okay, some of them that we've annoyed who decided to, yes, no. Frankie is our first remote volunteer because you're actually based in Cambridgeshire, aren't you? Which is...
I am, in a place called St Ives in Cambridgeshire, so not very close.
No.
Not commutable, no.
Not really, no. For those of you who don't know, Tudor House Museum in Worcester, actually, so quite a few miles away. But it's really nice. I mean, this is obviously a really difficult time for the museum sector and indeed every sector. But I do think that one of the positives is that, even a few months ago, we wouldn't have perhaps been so able to visualise what a remote volunteer might actually do. So it's nice that there's more
opportunities.
Yes. So, Frankie, you actually came up with the idea of a podcast, didn't you? Why a podcast?
Well, we've sort of been flung headfirst into this digital, almost entirely digital age, although Tudor House is still offline as well, aren't you? You're still going.
Yes. We still exist in reality as well.
Yes, and you can actually come and visit, especially if you're not based in Cambridgeshire. Yes.
Exactly. So it's not that it was ever conceived as a kind of replacement for offline activities or anything like that. It's more a supplementary idea for what me and Anna are doing for engagement, to see if we can make the most of the fact that everyone's now getting on board, more or less, with the digital and exploring the possibilities of the digital. So we thought, well, me and Anna spent a lot of time chatting through random things to see if any of it kind of works. And I can't remember how we started talking about a podcast, but the idea sort of came up because we know that it's something that several museums are exploring now as a way to engage people. Because we've always known that museums are physical collections often, but that's not just what they are. They're places for stories and exploration for ideas, for people. Especially Tudor House is very people-centred, isn't it? It's very much a centre. As a lot of local museums are. They really prioritise the community as well as the collections. So we've kind of jumped on that, haven't we? We just sort of thought, well, let's talk about some of these stories that maybe people can't visit the physical collections, or maybe the physical collections don't exist. So I think it just opens up a lot more possibilities, and it really centres the people who are visiting the museum, but also the people who are volunteering and working at the museum as well, because they're full of fantastic information and stuff that goes untapped.
And that is a really nice segue, actually, into our second volunteer we have on the line. Tim, are you there? Can you hear us, Tim?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can. This is fantastic.
See you.
This is brilliant. So, Tim, are you able to introduce ourselves? Sorry, I keep saying that. Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Tim. I gave up work in 2018. I was in the fortunate position where I was able to, and I needed something to keep me busy and interested. And I went along to the volunteers fair at the Guildhall, and I bumped into a very nice lady called Tonia there. Who within about 30 seconds of meeting had got my name, address, telephone number, and obviously got me marked me down for something. So I went along and I did a bit of stewarding, which is all well and good, but I found that didn't really fulfill my needs, if that's the right word for it. So Tonia suggested I looked at a couple of ladies who had been mentioned in a book by Pat Hughes way back in the 90s.
I think I would just like to say at this point, these were historical ladies who had a link to
oh yeah,
building.
once we dealt with those two ladies, we got to Pat Hughes. Yes. And she'd like to know a bit more information about these ladies because, as she put it, or paraphrasing, ladies don't get a very good deal in history, and we don't know much about them. And so I jumped into that. I had no experience of historical research whatsoever. My background's in IT and technology, but both sets of parents-in-laws had done their family trees, so I could tap into that knowledge. And I just got hooked. And for the last 2 years, I've spent more time than I should at the archives in Worcester, much more time than I should on the internet. There's so much on the internet you wouldn't believe. I've written 2 or 3 little research, we call them papers, but they're just notes really, just based from sitting here where I'm sitting today, trawling through the internet, using things like Ancestry and Find My Past and British newspaper archives. And as a result, I've ended up as one of the people who knows most about the history of Tudor House at this point in time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so what we decided that we should be really cruel to Tim, because Tim, if he wanted to, could probably write a sort of 50 or 60,000 word book on many of the residents of Tudor House. And obviously we have been here. We have been here since what, 1555? Was that what our technology report
The oldest building actually dates back to around 1480, and then the newest bit's 1550.
So yes, newest, yes. So there have been, 1 or 2 residents here over the years. There've been plenty of them, and what we decided to do, as I say, Tim could probably write a book on many of them. And we decided to be really cruel and tell him that what he has to do is introduce us to one of the residents of Tudor House, but we're going to call this bit breakneck biographies, because he has only 60 seconds to give us a complete lowdown.
Point out that when this was sold to me, I had 2 minutes to do it in.
Exactly. Well,
I pulled the rug from underneath me and give me 60 seconds. So,
but if you carry on like this, it'll be 30 seconds for next month. So there we go. So
I'll just give you the name in 1 second.
Brilliant, brilliant. So who are you going to introduce us to today, Tim? Which resident of Tudor House?
Right. Well, I thought, given that the museum does like to focus on female residents, and that the very first person I looked at was a female resident, I would do Eleanor Shipway today.
Oh, excellent.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to start my timer, and when it gets to 60 seconds, I'm going to frantically start waving at you. So the challenge is, can you tell us about Eleanor Shipway in 60 seconds, starting in 3, 2, 1.
Eleanor Shipway lived at Cross Keys Inn, part of Tudor House, between 1731 and 1760. She might even have lived there earlier, because her parents, George and Mary, were in St Helens earlier, and George, a clothier, had a cellar head, so he ran a pub. We know he took over from a chap called William Welfare, so it must have been the Cross Keys. So she might have been brought up there, but later on in 1730, after she'd seen the death of one husband, she married again to Thomas Shipway, and they bought the property off the Stock family for £60. She then lived there until 1760, seeing off another husband. Thomas died in 1745, and she also saw off 2 sons, unfortunately, so fairly tragic. She died in 1760 and passed it on to her relatives. There you go, 60 seconds.
Brilliant. My God, you had five seconds left as well. I am
Well done,
very impressed. Now, Tim, you have actually written quite an extensive blog post about Eleanor Shipway, because obviously she did a lot more that could be fitted into 60 seconds, didn't she?
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, yes. And like I say, this is one of the first things I wrote up.
Brilliant, fantastic. And if you want to know more about Eleanor Shipway, obviously, you could come and visit us at the museum. That would be fantastic. But if you wanted to do that from home, where can people find your writing on Eleanor Shipway, Tim?
Right, so if they go to the Tudor House website, and Tonia will give the address at some point, go to the blogs page, and I can't remember which month it was, around about May, June, in the blog you'll find, or follow the hashtag Tales from Tudor House.
Yes. She will be there in all her husband seeing off glory. Yes.
It's a lovely turn of phrase. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's brilliant. So, we mentioned that obviously Tudor House as a building has been around for quite a while.
Yeah, a few years.
Tudor House as a museum been around for slightly less time.
Yeah, 16 years this year. The museum's been in existence.
Which is actually not too bad at all. Although when you start off as a building that was constructed in the sort of 1480s, it doesn't quite look so impressive. But obviously we've come quite a long way since then. Now I've only been here since November of last year. And Tonia, how long have you been here now?
It'll be 4 years at the end of October.
4 years. So it had been going for quite a while before either of us came along. But Jim, you have been here since the beginning of the museum, that is, not the building.
It feels like the beginning of time.
Yes. So who are you, Jim? What's your role at the museum?
I've been chairman of the museum since its inception in 2003. We opened in 2004. It's been quite a privilege and a very interesting ride to get to where we are today. But I think we are very proud of what we've done. A huge number of people have helped us along the way, a lot of them in a voluntary capacity, and it's a testament to the good nature of people, the Worcester people, mostly in this case, to say that we've got to where we are at the moment.
So 2003, what happened in 2003 to start a museum?
Well, I suppose it goes back to actually 1972 when the Worcester City Council had the Museum of Local Life here. So in fairness, the concept of a museum on site started at that time. And it was a very well loved museum, visited by almost every child in the city, and there was a real sort of mishmash of things to do, things to look at, a traditional old museum with a bit of everything in it, really. Unfortunately, at 2003, the City Council were looking to economise on expenditure, and I think that's been a recurring theme since then with councils, and particularly with leisure activities, and particularly with the museum sector. There's a chap called John Bennett, who was a very well-known man in the city, ran a company called Bennett's Dairies, a big dairy farm in St John's. And he was a very public-spirited citizen, and he tackled me and said, look, we've got to do something about this. Which really came down to us approaching the council and saying, what if we opened Tudor House as a voluntary heritage centre at the time we called it, and would you allow us to do that? And therein lies another tale. So it was 2003 really is the answer to your question.
There we go.
I can't imagine they just handed over the keys.
Off you go.
Yeah.
Well, because it's been such a long time ago, I did dig around in a bit of history. And one thing that I came up with was a newsletter from what was then called the Friends of Worcester Museums and Art Gallery. This was a spring 2004, and the chairman was a chap called David Thorpe, and he interviewed John Bennett and myself. He also interviewed a very eminent local councillor called Jeff Carpenter. And there was an interesting dilemma because whilst financially there was a way forward and we felt we could raise funds and keep the building going and keep a museum going, there was also a feeling that, at the time at least, that as volunteers were creeping into the museum sector, we were actually denying people jobs. And it was an interesting social dilemma, you might say. And of course, many years later, David Cameron came up with his great big society idea, which seemed to me quite a step too far.
Yes.
Nevertheless, in a funny sort of way, we were one of the big society of 2003. And a group of us came together, talked to the council, and they said, well, we're not sure whether you can do this or not, but why don't we give you a license for a year, see what you can make of it, which is what happened. And there was no cost associated with it. And we set up a very modest collection of artifacts and stories about Worcester, and in fact just had the downstairs cafe and what is now the tavern, the other side of the alleyway here, to exhibit various things about Worcester. So that was really the lead-in, and as Tonia suggested, it was a way that we were able to put our toe in the water and allow the council to have a look at us.
So you got this license for a year, and was it sort of we'll wait and see what happens after that year, or did you always sort of hope that it would go on? Was it sort of seen as temporary or hopefully permanent from the start?
Well, we were very confident we could make a go of things. In essence, it's a museum. It's perhaps two things. One, it's a nice place to show artifacts and invite the public in to look at an old building and so on. And I always say that's the sort of tip of the iceberg, and it's almost the nice bit. Because the other side of running any organisation, a museum included, is that you've got to raise money, you've got to pay people, you've got to deal with roofs that leak and,
Yes.
and floors that spring up and people that can sometimes be awkward.
I totally
So it's basically a business with all the functions that any other business has. So we almost operated on two levels. We've got a group of very good volunteers who were keen to work in the museum and show people around and do bits of research and so on. But we also had a board of people who donated their time and their business expertise to try and help us forward. One person, for example, Sheena Jones, was actually a company secretary, and she is still the company secretary, and she looks after all of the legal and the legal aspects of being a charity. And there are somewhat onerous obligations to report and to have transparency in your accounts and so on and so forth. And it's that bit of the iceberg under the water that's quite immense sometimes.
Yeah, it's big. It's not just a case of opening the doors and serving people a slice of cake when they finish their tour. There's quite a lot of compliance goes on behind the scenes.
Things like health and safety and things like fire regulations in a building of this nature all take a lot of work to get to grips with.
Yes. So obviously that side of things is very serious. As you say, you don't often think about the kind of fire safety regulations, but you had better hope that you have them, just in case. But thinking about the actual museum itself and what it sort of exhibited in those early days, was there sort of a grand plan to tell a specific story, or was it all a bit kind of seat of the pants on that front?
Well, again, going back to the dichotomy that the council had, we were very keen to be part of the heritage and museum scene and not try and compete with what the city council were doing. And in some ways that's quite difficult because, for example, there are lovely stories about, I don't know, shall we say, Worcester sauce, various industries around Worcester, and so on and so forth, which we could tell in a small way, but we felt really in the end that was the remit of the city council and their city museum. So we were looking around to think what we could develop as our unique selling point, and we felt we could tell the story of Worcester through the eyes of people who might have lived in the area on Friar Street and in the house over the years. So clearly Tudor origins were important, the architecture of the building was important. We were very keen that citizens could walk in and freely walk around and look at the building, because that's not often the case, because a lot of the old buildings in Worcester are owned by private enterprises are not very keen for the public to walk in whilst they're doing their insurance business or whatever else they're doing. So we had to look at that, but also we at the time tried to show some of the heritage of Worcester's Victorian engineering, which was something we talked about in the early days, and hence the name Worcester Heritage and Amenity Trust, but not Tudor House Museum being the title of the charity.
Yes. So that is the Worcester Heritage and Amenities Trust is the charity arm of the title, and you are on the Board of Trustees of that charity, along with a number of other people. Have I got that right?
That's right, yes. There's 7 trustees, actually.
Yes. So what do you actually do as trustees? Do you have much input into sort of what we do at the museum, or is it all fire regulations all the time?
Do you need to go and renew your parking ticket?
Well, in some ways, the trustees have an area of responsibility and knowledge. We've got one trustee who's a chartered accountant who produces the financial reports for us. We have another trustee, as I said, who's a professional company secretary. At one stage, we had a lady who was a lawyer as a trustee to give us a legal view on various things. We have a chap who's very involved in the various other heritage type activities in Worcester, who's got a knowledge of what's going on in the heritage scene and the history of the town. And so we go on, and we have former curator Elizabeth Pimblett, who's now the curator of the Siding Museum in Hereford, who gives her professional expertise and guidance to us about various aspects of what I call museumship. So that's really, there's a sort of functionality to the board. But in the end, as a trustee of a charity, key things are that you're not allowed to be negligent, and that you've got to actually steer the charity to meet the objects of the charity, and the stated objects of the charity are to run Tudor House as a museum to show the history of Worcester, and to act as a sort of benefit to the citizens of Worcester and its visitors.
And obviously that's not just something that we have here at Tudor House. All museums will have their own Board of Trustees, and it's a lot of responsibility for people to do that voluntarily.
I've worked in several museums, and this is the first one I've worked where really the trustees aren't hidden behind some kind of invisible wall and just working behind the scenes. These are trustees who come in on a regular basis. They move things around legitimately, but they'll lift big pieces of furniture for me, or they'll paint walls, or they'll install wires and so they are incredibly hands-on here, which I've not experienced anywhere else. But it does mean I'm not left hanging waiting for a decision or for something to happen that needs happening straight away.
The hanging comes later. Yeah. It's the first time I've thought of myself as a poltergeist.
So on that note, with your sort of your DIY skills coming into call, is there anything that you've sort of been involved with at Tudor House over the years that you didn't expect you would be involved with back in 2003, or?
Well, I suppose the big change for us, and whether it falls into the category of answering your question, I don't know, is that always when we started, there was this sort of looming spectre of what happens if things go wrong and the roof falls in. What on earth are we going to do? Where are we going to get the money from? And when we delved into the reasons why the council felt they couldn't continue with Tudor House, one of the key issues was a fairly gloomy report on the cost of the building maintenance, and they have something like £200,000 or £300,000 worth of monies that they felt they had to set aside if they had to redo the roof. So we had a look at that, and there's a very well-known architect in Worcester called Nick Joyce, who is a specialist in Tudor buildings, and he did a condition survey of the place and thought that the roof was a lot better than the council seemed to think it was.
Okay, that's good for us then, I guess.
Always good to get a second opinion.
But the thing that then happened, and it was a tremendously fortunate thing for us, was that there's a charity in Worcester called Worcester Municipal Charities, set up in medieval times actually, and a strong part of its conditions are that they support poor and needy people, but there's a subset which is to do with education. And they actually were finding that because education these days, of course, is universally provided and free, they decided that, or they were finding it difficult to meet the conditions and the objects of their charity. So they saw Tudor House and its educational purpose as being a very worthwhile thing to support. So they gave us a modest grant to help us in the early days. And in 2007, they came to us and said, well, what if we bought the lease of Tudor House and let you have it for £1 a year, and we underwrite the maintenance costs? And I sort of pinched myself and thought, well, I didn't expect that. But it really was a night and day sort of experience. And of course, we then went through all of the legal stuff and thought about it hard, and in about 2 seconds said yes. So as I say, it was a tremendous support to us, and I suppose without their support and their financial support, plus the moral support they give us, I think it'll be a very different story here today.
Absolutely. And in fact, we still do an awful lot with education and school visits. And in fact, in a few weeks' time, Abby, the education officer at Tudor House, who's not here today but who will be in a few weeks time, to come and tell us about what we still do for schools, because obviously it's been a little bit different this year with the whole pandemic thing, but we have loads of schools who come year after year, don't they, come back to do the workshops we do about Tudor history and also the Second World War.
It's not just schools learning as well. People get very kind of fixated. It's school children of a certain age, but actually you're looking at adult learning and continuing that into further education. So it is really important what she does, and it's brilliant that we get the support we do from municipal charities.
It is worth saying as well as the support of the fabric that I just mentioned, they've actually grown in terms of the support to us, and Abby's post is supported by a grant from the charity, as is Tonia's post. So
I'm very grateful to them.
Yes, we like them an awful lot.
Yeah, they're my favourite.
Yes. So speaking of favourite things, a question for Jim in 2 parts. On the basis that this is being recorded, and I'm sure that all your fellow trustees and volunteers will want to listen to this, first of all, what has been your favourite part of being involved with Tudor House over the years, and what, if anything, has been, shall we say, less enjoyable over this time?
I think the favourite part, I suppose, I'm actually a mechanical engineer by qualification, but I think if I'd had a choice or my time again, I might have been an architect. So the favourite thing about this house is the building itself, and all of the intricacies of a Tudor timber framed building. I just find the whole thing fascinating, and as Tonia alluded to, I actually don't mind at all rolling my sleeves up and doing DIY to help preserve it and work with building companies and other tradesmen to do the work we've done on it. So that's absolutely my favourite aspect of it. The difficult thing, a bit like Tim, I was in the fortunate position of being able to retire earlier than most people. And one of the things I sort of promised myself was never to get involved in running a business again. We're fairly big businesses, and all of the interesting, often people problems or that go with that, and I thought, and I still do think actually, if running Tudor House or any other of the charitable things I get involved with becomes too much like work, I think that's the time when I'll decide that perhaps I've got better things to do. So when running being a trustee of Tudor House becomes very painful, and we have to think about the latest government legislation, that is my least favourite part of it.
Yes. So on that note, just as a kind of a final question, where do you sort of see the museum going into the future? Maybe if we think next sort of 5 years-ish, once we're all through the pandemic and that's all sorted, what's the sort of the longer term plan for Tudor House?
We've been fortunate in the last 6 months during the pandemic, I suppose, to have had a fair number of grants and come to fruition. So we've been very busy getting the fabric of the house in absolutely tip-top condition. We've been able to decorate it throughout, both externally and internally. We've built a new storage area. We've been able to renovate the ceiling in what we call the best room. We've been able to reinforce the purlins in the roof and reinforce the second floor or attic floor so it's safe and we're able to walk across it. So really we've got the place in great condition. We're very close to finishing the project to interpretation of the building and reinterpreting it, emphasising the Tudor origins much more than we have done in the past. I think the next stage really is to drive on the sustainability efforts to make sure that we have an income stream from visitor cafe and visitor shop. And we'd probably like to develop the backyard, which is a bit of a mess.
As everybody's backyard always is.
We have a very nice concrete car park at the rear of the museum, but we think there are ways of masking that and making the yard much more interesting. So really that's the next stage to develop sustainability. It's to do with cafe, it's to do with a coffee shop, it's to do with kitchen facilities. That's to do with expanding our ability to host various things in the museum to get stronger revenue streams.
An exciting time, I
Very.
think. Yes. Oh, well, thank you very much, Jim. And hopefully we'll have you back in 5 years' time to tell us about how all these plans have...
Am I podcasting for the next 5 years?
Yes, there we go. This is your new job. No longer manager, it's podcast officer. There we go. So, at least it didn't happen in the Jim. So we just wanted to sort of wrap up our episode by kind of sharing the love a little bit. Obviously, we've talked an awful lot about Tudor House today, as you would expect, but this is a somewhat challenging time for the heritage sector as a whole. So we just wanted to share some kind of local events, some more nationwide things that people might like to think about going to or seeing or listening to, just to kind of give people a bit of a boost in this tough time. So Tonia, would you like to go first?
Okay, well, locally, and actually very locally, my big cultural thing at the moment is Tudor House, because as Jim said, we're doing a complete reinterpretation around the building. And for those who don't work in the sector and are wondering why the hell we keep talking about reinterpretation, that basically means all the old information boards were taken down and put in storage, and we're having new ones created as we turn the focus back to the Tudor period. So it will become exactly what we say above the door, basically. It will become a Tudor house focusing on the 16th century, the people who lived here, what they were doing, what they were eating, how they were worshipping, the big societal changes that were going on. It's been an awful lot of research. The team led by Anna and involving Tim and several others, they've found a lot of information. So it's been condensing that for the designers. We're in the home stretch, I think. We've got the design of the boards agreed, and we're just kind of tinkering with the final bits of text. And that's kind of my cultural focus for Worcester this week. I don't really know what anyone else is doing because that's all I can think about. On a national basis, I've actually just booked tickets to go and see the Artemisia Gentilischi exhibition at the National Gallery. It just looks incredible. I mean, her backstory in and of itself, the things she was able to achieve despite all of the barriers put in her way, were astonishing. But her paintings, she's up there with Caravaggio really on her use of light and colour, and they're just stunning. Judith beheading Holofernes is an incredible painting. So one day I'll get printed on a t-shirt and wear when I'm very annoyed.
Give Julie's warning
to that's warning for the boyfriend. Yes. I've already got one that says that we are the granddaughters of the witches you forgot to burn. And when I wear that, he knows he's in trouble.
It's amazing what you can say with art and culture.
Yeah, absolutely. It affects all aspects of our life. So I'm really excited about going to see that exhibition. Plus, it will be the first time I've been out of Worcester since March. I'm going crazy here, people.
Yeah.
It's a nice city, but I've had enough.
Yes, expand the horizons a little bit.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay,
Exactly.
so speaking of expanding the horizons, Frankie, what is going on for you this month?
Well, I'm with Tonia. The Artemisa Gentileschi exhibition, and I can't wait. It's going to be amazing. But more locally to me, because as we discussed at the beginning, I'm not local to Worcester.
That's fine.
I'm going to, well, I have been visiting St Ives, Cambridgeshire, not Cornwall, our Norris Museum, which is our local museum, and we have a historic bridge in our town, if anyone happens to have visited St Ives, which is absolutely gorgeous, and it's still, you know, quite old school. You can just knock on the door, take the lock from the hook, although nowadays you have to go down to the Norris Museum and pick the key up, and you can just go into this chapel that's on this bridge and wander around. So there's some, yeah, just really nice cultural things to do in St Ives, which, you know, because I've been off at uni for studying and, you know, being all over the country really for the past kind of 5 or 6 years. So swings and roundabouts, coming back home and having to be a bit more local means I can kind of explore what we actually have here a little bit more. So that's what I'm going to be doing.
Why is it called the Norris? Sorry,
the Norris Museum. Yeah.
Yeah. Why is it called the Norris?
Yeah. It's, why is it called the Norris? Did you say?
Yeah.
I don't know actually. I'm gonna find out why it's called the Norris Museum. I bet in 3 minutes time I'm gonna think, oh, that's why it is, and it's
yeah. Well, if we find out, we'll put a thing in the description.
Yeah.
Definitely. I'm sure somebody listening will already know. So yeah, Artemisa Gentileschi and the Norris Museum for me.
Thank you. Well done on your pronunciation as well. It's much better than mine.
I think I butchered that.
Tim, what about you? What are you up to this month?
Okay, just unmute myself. You've thrown a curveball at me because I wasn't at all prepared for this, but as quickly as I could, I am looking forward to the reopening of St Swithin's Church on Church Street, between the Shambles and the High Street in Worcester. It's been closed for about 2 years now for major renovations, and they keep saying it's going to open next month, next year, or whatever, and that keeps getting pushing back. And I guess it's been pushed back even further with the pandemic. But I really would like to see what they've done there. Every now and again, we get snippets on Facebook, and somebody goes in there and has a nose around, and it looks absolutely fascinating. So that's what I'm looking forward to locally. Of course, I'm looking forward to getting back to Tudor House. I haven't been there since March for personal reasons and the pandemic. I would really love to see how that's, you know, when the new interpretations are there. Nationally, like I say, curveball. I'm looking forward to the third part of Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall trilogy hitting TV screens.
Oh yes.
I love Wolf Hall. I can't remember what the sequel was called.
Bring Up the Bodies.
And I've heard the radio adaptation of the third book, and I just want to see how they present it on the TV.
Do you know, I haven't been able to read the third one because I know what happens. I mean, everyone knows what happens to Cromwell. It's not nice, but he's such a divisive character, but I found him so well portrayed. I was really invested in him, and the idea that that is what happens to him at the end, I almost physically can't bear it. So I haven't read it yet. I heard Anton Lesser, who frankly could read a phone directory, and I'd listen to him reading it, but I switched off before the last episode. I can't bear this. I don't want that to happen.
No.
Oh, fantastic.
But that period is full of some really horrible people.
Yeah, it is. Really that's why it's fun to do.
Yes. Well, speaking of sort of periods of history that are full of really horrible people, I'm going to kind of switch up the order a bit here, and I'm going to go with my sort of national one first because it's a bit grimmer, and then hopefully end on a light note. It is October is obviously Black History Month, and I have been really, I'm not quite sure enjoying is the right word because of the nature of it, but there's been a really, really interesting, really moving series on the BBC, fronted by Samuel L. Jackson, actually the actor, about the history of slavery. And in the TV series, they work with a group called Diving with Purpose, who are a group of divers who dive the wrecks of slave ships to uncover obviously the evidence of slavery. And as I say, to say that I'm enjoying it is potentially the wrong word, because it's very moving, but obviously it is a very tough topic. But it's such a necessary story to tell. But also, I wasn't aware of that group diving with a purpose who were featured in the documentary at all before then, and I just thought, what an incredible job that they are doing. And it's on the BBC. I think it's in 4 parts, and we've just had part 3 last Sunday, but I'm sure it will be on iPlayer. So a tough watch, but a really interesting one there.
Yeah, that's been a great series. I really, like you say, enjoy is the wrong word. I love the way the recent Black Lives Matter, it's challenging our preconceived ideas and our thinking that has, through a laziness or no fault of our own, that's just what we have accepted as our history, and the movements that have sprung up this last 12 months are really challenging that, and I found that really refreshing.
Yes. And on a slightly lighter note, my somewhat more local thing that I'm really looking forward to is that Birmingham Museums Trust has just managed to reopen, which is fantastic. I don't know what's going on, but I'm sure it will be something really interesting and really enjoyable, because they always have such great exhibitions there. So I'm excited to just kind of turn up, obviously having pre-booked, and just see what's going on, because I have missed Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery and the other places. I'm really pleased that so many places are.
BMAG is wonderful, all those pre-Raphaelites and the Staffordshire Ward and everything. But you've heard of Cold War Steve?
No, I
on
haven't.
Twitter.
No.
Well, he does collages of celebrities. They always feature the guy from EastEnders, whose name I can't remember, and they're hilarious. They're like satire of recent events. He's done a series of these collages for BMAG, Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, and they are on display at the moment. So I would not delay people. Get your tickets.
There we go. That's my weekend sorted.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
I also want some kind of recompense for promoting all these other museums.
So please write to us. Yes.
Reimburse.
Yes, there we go. So just to finish up, if you do want to find us elsewhere, either because you have been so fascinated about what we've been talking about, or because you are another museum who, come on, chop. You can find our website at Tudor House. Is it Tudor House Museum or Tudor House? I should know these things.
It's tudorhouse.org.uk.
And that has got all of our information on there, and there's a specific tab on the homepage with the blog, which will take you to Tim's fantastic writing on Eleanor Shipway. And if you want to follow us, we are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube, all at Tudor House Worcester, all one word, all lowercase. Worcester is WORSC at Tudor House Worcester. And hopefully we'll see you in a month's time for our next episode.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.